This is The Resilient Life, where we believe that every human will struggle in this life. Our challenge is to struggle well. I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war, my mom to cancer, and I'm the daughter of a retired Marine. I'm also a wife, mom, author, and president of one of the nation's leading veteran service organizations. Join me and some incredible guests as we explore the value of struggling well through life's inevitable challenges. Welcome to another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. I'm bringing back a guest, Tom Schueman, who has been with us before. And it's kind of wild, Tom, when I think about it, because you were on with us almost a year ago that you and I recorded an episode. And here we are now. You have a newly released book, Always Faithful, the story of the war in Afghanistan, the fall of Kabul, and the unshakable bond between a Marine and an interpreter. You co-wrote that with your interpreter, Zach. And what a year it's been.
Yeah, it's been quite a year, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, welcome back to the podcast. And, I wanted to have you back on to talk about where we are a year later
Sure.
with everything that's happened, but also, to talk about this book. And I had the opportunity to read this book and dive into it. And it brought back a lot for me. And so, just kind of getting right into it. When you and I spoke, it was in late July, and you shared the story of Zach, of your interpreter, and how you were working with to get his special immigrant visa. We knew that things were unshaky in Afghanistan, but it really, I would say, was probably 10 days after you and I recorded that everything went crazy in Afghanistan. And so you were kind of telling the story of Zach. Just bring us back and give our listeners just a little bit of backstory on Zach, your relationship with him, and what you were doing up until, we're going to get into how he eventually got out, but the things you were doing up until then to find I would say the channels you were using to try and get him out up to that point.
Sure. I deployed to Sing in Afghanistan in 2010 as a rifle platoon commander with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Zach was my interpreter. That deployment was extremely kinetic. It was the deadliest battle in our nation's longest war. And I went back a second time as a recon JTAC and as an advisor guy. And so between those two deployments, about 17 months in Afghanistan, I've worked with a dozen different interpreters, and most of them do their duties, as in they translate. Zach was much more than someone who just translated. Zach was someone who, when the bullets were flying, was still standing shoulder by shoulder with you. Whereas many interpreters, and I don't say this negatively, but many of them, when the bullets started flying, you couldn't find them. You'd have to come back, and they'd be laying down and like, I guess we can go now. And so, but their job wasn't to be a Marine. Their job was to translate. Whereas, when I would have mass casualties, 3 or 4 guys injured, and we needed someone to pick up a rifle, Zach picked up a rifle. When the Taliban was about to initiate an ambush, Zach heard that over the radio. He sprinted through a minefield and tackled the guy who was going to initiate the minefield. So Zach quickly became, elevated in his position within the platoon as this is someone who just interprets it, like this is one of us. And so he absolutely went above and beyond his duties as an interpreter, and really became a brother, part of our family, part of the platoon. And we stayed in touch over Facebook after I left. He went back to his province and worked as an interpreter for the CIA in SOF. They were Green Berets were working out of his province, very near to his village. And so he ended up spending about 4 years in service to the U.S. military. He did some contracting in the Korengal Valley before he worked with the Marines, where he was hit by an IED there. Then he worked with us, with the Marines. Then he worked with the Army and the CIA. So about cumulatively almost 4 years. Once the CIA and the soft guys left his province, he had to go into hiding, and he immediately started to be persecuted. And so at about 2015, 2016, he reached out to me and said, sir, we always stayed in touch over Facebook, and he reached out to me and said, I've started my special immigration visa package. Can you help? And I said, of course. So that began a 5-year process that turned out to be insurmountable. And the technicalities and the bureaucratic red tape that we could not cut through was astounding, shocking, appalling at times. And so Zach's service to the Marines is documented for about 9 months, and he has this thing that this magical human resource letter. You need the magical HR letter, and so we had about 9 months of his documented service. And for the longest time in the special immigration visa, 1 year was all that was required. So we were 3 months short, and we were trying to kind of work with that. And then arbitrarily, they changed it to 2 years of service. And then recently, they've now changed it back to 1 year of service. So as you can see, that 2 year number was kind of silly because it's back to 1 year. And the thing about CIA and soft guys is they're maybe hard to find. And his contracting company that he worked for disappeared overnight. And so we could not, despite testimonies and witnesses and whatever else we could bring to bear, provide an additional HR letter. And without that, nothing could happen. Just insurmountable. So we would go on and off. Like I would find a contact of someone who got an interpreter here, and I would say, hey, who did you talk to? How did this? And so for a couple of years, we would go back and forth, still trying to, once a year, we'd do a little push. But Zach became very defeated by the whole process and frustrated by the whole process, and finally said one day, you know what, sir, I tell all my friends in America that I miss them and I love them, but I just am going to go teach these boys English at school. And so we kind of gave up on the process. And when the president announced in April of 2021 that we would withdraw from Afghanistan by the end of August, I contacted Zach and I said, what does that mean to you? He said, that means I will be dead and my family will be dead. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to get to work. And so I started a guerrilla media campaign. I started using my social media account. I posted a 1 minute video and I said, here's who Zach is. Can anybody help? And that snowballed. And there was no shortage of good Americans who wanted to help. I spent hundreds of hours talking to people who would have liked to help. We're talking about congressmen, senators, aides, attorneys, media. Everyone was really interested in helping. But despite talking to people in very high offices of government, high-ranking military officials, it seemed that we weren't gaining any traction or progress. So I talked to a mutual friend of ours, Jared, and I reached out to Jared in June, and I said, hey, what's going to happen to the interpreters? Is someone going to send them a note and say, hey, come to Kabul? Are they going to go get them from their provinces? Or he said, Tom, if they're not here and they're not at the airport, they're not leaving. And I wouldn't wait for someone to say it's time to come. I said, okay. So I told Zach, hey, it's time to get going from Kunar. And so just that was really, that'll get us close to the evacuation. That's kind of that in and of itself, leaving his Kunar province to getting to Kabul was a whole episode. His days in Kabul were all sketchy and dangerous. And then obviously the fall was extreme. And there were many false flags of hope in that we were on the cover of the New York Times, and we're like, okay, well, You're on the cover of the New York Times. Something's going
That's
to
gotta
happen.
mean something. Yeah, sure.
It means that people care, but it doesn't mean that you get your visa. We were Senator Durbin during Secretary Blinken's confirmation hearing said, "There's a Major Schueman. Are you going to help his interpreter? He's on the cover of Chicago Tribune today. So sometimes today, are you going to help him get his interpreter out to the Secretary of State, the guy who owns the visa program?" And the Secretary of State says, "I know who Major Schueman is. I've read the article, and I'm going to help you get his interpreter out." Like, okay, well, you've got one of the senior senators, you've got the Secretary of State. We should be.
And you just heard nothing after that statement. I was shocked by I knew, obviously was following not all the way back from 2015, but, I read the Chicago Tribune article. I watched you on Rachel Maddow. Like, I saw the amount of press that you were getting and how you were highlighting Zach's story. And it seemed like, well, there's no way that they're not going to hand pluck this guy and his family out of here, right? And to see, and again, bringing it back to our mutual friend, all of these big people in big positions, and it came down to a major in the Air Force that got it done. And that really says something about where we are today. At least it did for me. You know, so when I interviewed you that day, I was talking to you about, and I was watching as an observer, like, wow, tell me about this. You're working with Zach, and I listened to the story of Zach and the work that he did, and I was inspired by the amount of time that you were putting in to help your friend. And the night after we recorded, I had been reminded of an interpreter that had sent me a message on Facebook a year prior. And it wasn't about getting out of Afghanistan. It was from a Afghan interpreter. He had served for 8 years with U.S. forces, him and his brother. And he had sent a message to my public Facebook page just saying, my name is Bashamal. I live in Afghanistan. I somehow came across your page. I want to thank you for what you do to honor your brother. My brother was killed by the Taliban for fighting alongside U.S. forces. And it was just this, long letter, a long message about that. And, I'd wrote him back, like, I'm sorry for the loss of your brother. And, just in that respect. Well, I went back the next day after I recorded with you, and I'm like, I wonder whatever happened to him. And I shot him a note, and I posted it to my social media, and I said, hey, are you still in Afghanistan? And he wrote, yes, ma'am, I'm still in hell. And it was really you that I was like, all right, well, Tom's working to get his guy out. Like, what can I do I felt compelled to help. And I was kind of in the same position that I think probably many of the well-meaning people that were surrounding you were like, I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? He just wrote, no, I'm still in hell. I'm not gonna be like, all right, have a great day. Right. So I'm like, okay, now I just wrote myself in to like part of this process. And he was also in the same, well, he actually was in a different situation than Zach. He had applied for his SIV. He had all his paperwork. He had everything that he needed, but it had not been approved. And he had been waiting for 2 years for the approval, along with his brother. And when I was reading your book, I loved the way that your book worked, where it was like your perspective and then Zach's perspective of the same events that were happening through this entire process. And I learned through the book that Zach had been poisoned a couple years before leaving. Like, I mean, the Taliban was out to kill him, and they almost did. And then I was gripped to the end of the story because I knew the ending and I knew that there was a lot of the similar characters to what I went through. And so I'm reading the book and like, I'm like, all right, when's Jared coming in? And I talked to Jared. I'm like, Jared, like when I knew you were writing this book, I said, Jared, you're an integral part of the story. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm not, I just helped my friend out from, that I went through basic training with in the Marine Corps. Like he's such a humble individual. He was just like, no, I don't play a large role in this. And I'm like, no, you do. And then I'm seeing like Malad come in and like literally the same process that you went through with Zach to get him through that Abbey Gate. 2 days later, Jared was doing it again, along with Malad, another Afghan. But the day that my friend went through, he met and went through with him. So Malad got out. Malad's living in Virginia now. But it was wild to see you recount that. And it brought up a lot of emotions for me because everything you were writing where you're like, I hadn't slept for 2 weeks. I was surviving off tobacco and energy drinks. And I'm like, I was right there with them. I think you probably were already sleeping when I was still because Zach is already on the plane, but I was like, oh, I was surviving off tobacco and energy drinks too. I was doing the same thing you were doing. So it was just, I loved that you put it down in a book, and the book is fantastic. It really is. You guys did a beautiful job rating it. It was great.
Thank you.
But let's talk about those last few days and getting Zach out of there and what that took and the role that Jared played essentially in that.
Yeah, Jared was integral and essential. He is also, like you said, very humble. We were operating under the assumption that we had until the end of August, and so that was our planning horizon. And so things were urgent, but we thought we had 2 more weeks. And so we're doing things like Zach is applying for his passport and just getting his passport itself. When he applied for his passport, they said it's going to take 6 months. But if you can bring $500, it could be here in 24 hours. And so we get the passports, we're getting his IDs, we're trying to do everything through official channels. We're trying to do everything through the proper protocols to the best of our ability to work through the system, because we still have faith that the system is going to deliver what it's promised. And we still believe that there is somehow people who are SIV eligible or applicants they're going to be evacuated is what we're working under that assumption. But everything changed the day Kabul fell. And so Zach is at the post office sending me a message like, they don't have my wife's passport again. We've got everybody's, but we don't have my wife's. I don't know. And then like the next message is the Taliban is here and the post office is closed and now the streets are empty and no one knows what. And so that immediately changed our calculus. Is the sense of urgency went from very urgent to got to get out right now. Yeah. And so we call it an escalation of force in the military. And so I started to escalate what I posted. And so I consulted with Zach and said, hey, we got to put a face to the story. The stories need a face. And I think if we can put a face to the story, we'll bring some more attention and it might garner some kind of Hail Mary. This is all Hail Marys at this point. And also it's all bad options at this point. It's not like you said, where somebody's got to come just pluck this guy out. It's like, no, that's not happening. And so it's bad option 1, bad option 2, worse option 3. And so we went with bad option 1, which was reveal who Zach was and try to increase the amount of attention that the story was getting in hopes that somehow, some way that might propel his case to the front of the line. And it worked as I anticipated. When I put Zach's face to the story, it went bonkers, I think the first post got like 17,000 likes, and so, and it was my first post my first post was just a couple words on a black screen. It said, Zach's at the Abbey Gate. Can anybody help? And then I got that. And then in the next post. And so Zach had 3 attempts to escape. I kind of chronicled each of those attempts and their failures. And through that, the story gained significant momentum, significant criticism from everybody saying, oh, not everybody, but plenty of people saying, great job, now you killed them. Oh, now you just, and all these people giving me so much negative energy and vibes and saying that I've now condemned my interpreter to death because I was doing this for social media clout. And I'm like, no one in the world wants this guy to live more than me. Like, and I understand, and people are like, OPSEC. It's like, I know what freaking OPSEC is. I'm a Marine officer. Like, I know what OPSEC is. Like, there is a risk assessment that we've determined, and we've determined that we are going to go public. And so that was really tough. And I also just didn't have a lot of emotional resiliency at that time. So like, I'm still a little bit obviously butthurt about it, because I just didn't have, like, if someone did that now, it would not, but I was very emotionally vulnerable when I was coming under fire from a bunch of folks. But through all that, the real story is what Zach is doing, what people like Jared are doing, what the Marines of 1A and 2-1 were doing. And so the first I got connected to a Marine captain named Sam. He was a company commander doing security, and I said, hey, Sam, can you help my interpreter? He said, yep, send him to this gate on this date and time. Zach goes to the gate at that date and time, and that's the day the airport got overran. So everybody's familiar with those images of people running onto the airfield, jumping on planes. So the moment that Zach got to the airport, it's the same moment that the airport got breached. And so Sam obviously he was very busy, but then he had to go tend to a breached airport, and the gate got locked. That day, his family was stuck outside the gate for several hours. The Taliban machine gunned the crowd right next to the children. Kids saw someone killed by a machine gun. They walked home that day, and all I could do was apologize to Zach, and I felt like a failure. And his wife, I think, was not super into what just happened, and said, maybe we just need to go back. And he said, look, just send somebody to come get me. I can't do that again. And okay, reset. And all this is just like planning an operation from the command operating center. You're just planning this operation. But the frustrating thing is, I've always, because I'm still, only a major, all my operational experience is the tactical level where I can go to the problem. We call it the point of friction, and you can go to the point of friction and you can influence the point of friction. Very challenging to try to where you can't actually put yourself there. And so the second time, again, Sam says, I'm at this gate, send them. Same thing, crowds start to surge. They close the gate. And I post a picture. Zach is feet away from a Marine. He's recording a video talking to me and saying, I could see the Marines. I'm calling them. They won't let me in. They won't let anybody in. What should I do? Just tell me, sir, what should I? And as he's saying that, you hear machine gun fire over the head, and he's holding his baby, and she's screaming and crying. I'm like, oh God. And so when they start firing everywhere again, this is Mlad is there. He jumps in the car with Mlad. They go back to the apartment, and now he's like, I'm not going back to that airport. Yeah. Send the Navy SEALs to get me, like, and I had like a little team that was kind of helping me through all this, and everybody is very risk averse in that they're like, just wait. We'll just wait. Like let's just wait, and then maybe we can get the SEALs to get them, and let's wait, and then maybe. And I'm just thinking, like, time is not on our side, and I do not think the situation is going to get better with time. I am all these are assumptions, but I'm thinking it's going to get worse. And so operation number 3, we had 3 courses of action. We had a secret CIA gate with a very complex link up plan. We had a gate where I think she's an Army major. She said, hey, I'm getting people out of this gate today. I know it works. There's a challenge and password. Send them to this gate. They'll get out. And then there's the kind of the routine one that we've been going with is like, hey, I know where the Marines are going to be on this date, and we could just try to do that. I went with option 2, although option 1 probably had the highest degree of success if executed successfully, but because there's some complexity, we went with option 2. Convinced Zach to go out there a 3rd time. He can't get to the gate that I'm trying to send him to because there's a Taliban checkpoint between the Abbey gate and the gate that I'm trying to get him to go to. And he basically says, I don't know what to do. I can't do anything. I can't get there. You have to do something. Send someone to get me. And I sent Jared a message on Signal, and I said, hey, I need you to go get my body. He's like, I'm in the COC. I'm not doing stuff outside the gate. Like, I'm in the watch. I'm like, dude, I need you to go get my friend. He's like, okay, I'll do it. And so I sent him a picture of what Zach was wearing that day with his family, and Jared grabbed 2 other PJs, and they ran out and they jumped on top of the wall. And we were in a group chat with Zach, Jared, me, and on WhatsApp, and Jared saying, Zach, put your son with the blue shirt on your shoulders, put your son with the blue shirt on his shoulders, and then no messages for about 2 hours. And that was very suspenseful. But next thing I know, Jared sends me a picture. He's inside. The kid's got chocolate. And yeah, I mean, what a hero Jared and his team were, breaking the protocols to jump outside the gate, to pull him in. And what a brave woman Diwa, Zach's wife, is. What a courageous father and husband Zach is for continuing to literally risk his life to provide his family a better opportunity. And it was harrowing, it was gut-wrenching, and but at the end of the day, thanks to some great Americans and some really brave Afghans, Zach was safely evacuated.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, you had talked about, I think it might have been the second time they had gone out there, and Zach had sent you video of one of his kids crying. And there was, so Bashamal went, he went twice to the airport. The first day that I sent him there, again, to, link up with Jared, I'm like, all right, I know this works because Tom just got his buddy out via Jared. This time we had a sign. So Jared was like, I need a sign, so we had a sign. But the first time they went, they turned around. And I think, again, they had a 3-year-old son. Bashamal's wife was like, this is sketchy. Of course it was. And so they came back, and he texted me, he's like, we came back. And I'm like, why'd you come back? And so the next night it was like, all right, we're going to get Malad involved. And it's so funny because I look back now, I have no idea how Malad got into the Signal chat with me, but here it was me, Malad, Jared, and my friend Pat Ford, who's a Marine. And I think Pat may have reached out to you. I don't even know. But next thing you know, it's the 4 of us, and it's like, all right, Malad and Bashamal, you're going to meet at 2 a.m. And at this point, Malad's like, I'm getting out too. He's like, I'm ready. And so it was like, you're going to meet at 2 a.m. and you're going to head to the Abbey Gate. And so they did. And there was everything you detailed in your book when you were like, he was right there by the Marines. He was showing me, he was screaming. I was doing the same things. I was literally thinking, okay, Bashamal was standing against the gate. He was literally against the gate. And he's sending me pictures, and he's like, is this Jared? And I'm like, no, it's just a bunch of Marines standing there. Every guy in a uniform, he's like, is this Jared? And I'm like, no. But I'm like, those are Marines. So I start sending him screenshots of my brother because I'm like, well, the maybe 50%, 40% of Marines, if they're officers, they're going to know the name Travis Manion. You know, I'm thinking it's a recognizable name in the Marine Corps. And this random Afghan has pictures of him. I'm like, show the Marines this picture and say, I'm Travis Manion's sister. You know, I mean, I was grasping at straws, anything that would work. So he's trying to flash some pictures. He's like, they're just telling me to shut up. You know, they don't, and I got it. But he sent me, and they were there for probably about 9 or 10 hours that day. And he's standing with Malad, and they're holding the sign up, and the crowd was enormous at this time. And he sent me a picture of Atal. I don't know, you know, it was the middle of the night, and he sends me this picture of Atal and his 3-year-old son, and he's sweating profusely. He's crying, and he said, Atal is overheating. I don't know how much longer we can do this. And Jared was like dead on communications. He was not responding to any communications. And I'm sitting there like, I'm playing God to these people. Like, what? And he's like, what should we do? Should we stay or should we go? And I'm like, I don't know how I'm lying in my daughter's bunk bed because I had to, like, it was the only room that was, you know, that and my husband's on the other side, and he's popping his head in from the bedroom, and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. I said, I honestly have no idea. And thank God for my friend Pat, because he was like talking me off a ledge. Then Pat's not answering his phone for a while. So Bashamal is just texting me. I'm blowing up Pat. Pat answers the phone. He's like, sorry, I fell asleep. I'm like, you can't effing fall asleep. Like, do you understand? I'm like, you can't fall asleep. I'm like, what should we tell them to do? He's like, just hang tight. Jared will be in touch. Jared, and he's like, just tell him to hang tight. And when I sent that text and I said, just hang tight, I had this like feeling in my gut, and I was just like, oh my God, am I making like the wrong decision here? And I'm telling these people, and listen, you're a Marine, like you said, like you're used to running operations. I'm not. You know, I'm a 40-year-old woman lying in my kid's bunk bed telling these Afghans like, and it felt so unnatural to me, and I didn't know what to do. And then the next thing you know, I guess it was probably an hour later, I just got the text from Jared, and it was like, I have him. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I could not believe it. I was like, oh my, it was wild. And I will say that what happened, and I have to imagine you have a huge social media following. Like, I became inundated with Afghans reaching out, can you help me, sending me every sort of document. Here's all my paperwork. I mean, legitimate. And I'm sure there were probably some bad actors in the mix, but like legitimate, this is where, you know, this is what I did. This is who I served with. This is all my paperwork. And Jared, for until the explosion at Abbey Gate, which I think was 3 or 4 days after Bashamal got out, he was like caravanning like groups through that gate. And when I talked with him after, he said he got to the point where nobody was listening. Nobody at the higher level was listening. It seemed like nobody was understanding what we were leaving behind and understanding that commitment we had made. And he said, I remember just being there and being like, I'll give it all up today, everything I'm doing, because I'm going to do the right thing. And I had so much respect for him when he shared that with me, because it was hard to think about in that moment how much he was putting on the line for these people.
Yeah, putting your rank on the table is, I mean, it's one of the most serious and grave consequences of things that you can do, you know, as an officer. But if you aren't willing to put it on the table, and it's got to be something significant, you know, it can't be, you can't, what is it? You can't swing at the first pitch every time. You got to pick and choose your battles, right? It is a rare moment in your career where you're going to be in a situation where you have to say, if I don't put my rank on the table for this, I just don't deserve to have the rank. And you always do it for people. And when you know that within that there's honor and there's integrity within that process, and that's when you got to put that rank on the table. And so of course Jared is just a man of the highest character, and just speaks volumes about who he is, because no one wants to piss off senior officers. I mean, it's you don't want to do that, and Jared didn't want to, but you have to be a man of principle and fight for what you believe in. And that's a little Zimbeck reference, as I'm sure you're aware. And then you know, it's funny, like the haze that you're talking about. Like, I don't even know how I ended up in a signal group with these people. Like, I was in. It's like, how did I get connected? I'm not even really sure. I don't really know who I'm talking. That all is so hazy. And then the, you know, to your statement, well, Tom did this, so this is what's, and so yes, like Tom's a success. Like, Tom is not a success. Tom, there's no success in Tom's story, and Tom for 5 years failed, for 2 times failed. The system never worked, and so
Tom, no, I don't want to interrupt you, but like I don't believe the statement Tom failed. Like, the system failed, Zach. Like, the system failed. I mean, I fully believe that.
Fair enough. Clarification noted. I just, when everybody, as you reference, starts to inundate you and say, hey, you did this, you're the success in this story, it's like, I did, like, what I did, I'm not sure can be replicated, because it rested on a few individuals' heroism and courage. And to say that I can replicate that team's heroism and courage to continue, like, I can't guarantee or promise any of that. And it was so tough because I received thousands of messages to this day, weekly, almost daily, continue to receive these messages. And clearly it's an issue that I'm empathetic towards. Clearly it's an issue that I have a heart for. And every time you receive one of these messages, it's like, don't do it for me, do it for my children. The Taliban are going to, and it's like, and you become emotionally invested all over again. And then you're in this kind of position where, well, do I open myself up to each of these messages and become emotionally and mentally involved, or do I become callous to people suffering and just ignore the message? And it was tough. It was tough. It was bad. It was ugly, and the situation should have never been like that in the first place. But like, it took great Americans like you and Jared to kind of work around the system, and it should never come to that.
I still get messages almost daily too, and most of them come via social media. So I don't want to say it's easier for me to ignore from that perspective, but I got an email yesterday, and I got to click on the email, and it was a young man who sent me an email. His dad was a general with the Afghan army, and he said that his father had emailed me last year to help him, and I never responded to the email. And his father has since been killed by the Taliban. Sent me pictures of his father with articles attached, because his father was a high-ranking army general. And he said, you ignored my father. Please don't ignore my family now. And that one hit me pretty hard. And, I feel like I don't know. I haven't responded. I don't know if I'll respond, because again, I don't know where to turn for help. I know there's a lot of these fringe groups that are saying they're still on the ground in Afghanistan saving people. I don't know the reality of that. I I don't want to refer them. Oh, click on this, hit up Pineapple Express. I don't know what's happening there. But in the same token, I don't have Jared on the ground. Like the way that Bashama got out, the way that Zach got out, like you said, it was with a couple of people that, risked their livelihood to help. And so that, I would say, is the toughest thing for me, to read things like that and think like that I'm callous and ignoring it, but I also don't know how to respond to it. And, I try to focus on my friends that are here, that live a mile down the street from me, that I just, that work at the Travis Manion Foundation, that I see all the time. But I struggle with that a lot, like a lot.
Yeah, it's tough. There's not a right answer, and it's it's a tragedy. Is what it is.
Yeah. What I'd love to know is, you wrote this book, and the book, like I said, is fantastic. It's a fantastic account of the process you went through with Zach, but also the time you served with him as well. It's beautifully written, and I think if you have any interest in the war in Afghanistan and the fall of Afghanistan, you're going to want to read it. But what are you hoping that people learn from it and take away from this book?
Sure. I think part of the answer is in the fact that it's co-authored and I'll get to that, because that's I would say the primary part. But I also I wanted to talk a little bit about 3-5's legacy. Those Marines, those 25 Marines, and they have a story that's worth being told. They're men worth remembering, and this was an opportunity to do that. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my heroes who have helped me get to where I am today, and that's my mom. So just to be able to tell, I'm only anything that I am today because of the people who made me and supported me. And so to be able to talk a little bit about my mom is she's a hero, and her story deserves to be told. And so, and then it was when we talked with HarperCollins about this book, it was all I never set out to write a book. It wasn't what was I just had my third kid in 3 years. I was studying at the War College, getting a graduate degree there, running Patrol Base Abate. It wasn't like, oh, you know what would also be great to do is to write a book. But the opportunity for Zach to be able to tell his story, and more importantly, to be able to tell the story of the impact of the war in Afghanistan. And so I had a professor at Georgetown. I took a class called Asian American Literature, and we always read many of the texts from the people that were impacted the most from whatever area, and in their own voice. And so I would never have written a book about Afghanistan, just me. Like, here's Tom Schueman, who spent 17 months there, and here's what Afghanistan is all about. It's like, well, how about I have a brother who's from Afghanistan and grew up in Afghanistan, spent 30 years in Afghanistan. Maybe he can talk a little bit about what that war means to him and what the impacts on that culture were, and what it was like growing up in that country. And so that, to me, is what made the book really worth writing, is to give an opportunity for everyone to learn a little bit about this country that has been part of our lexicon. But that, my mids at the Naval Academy don't remember a world before Afghanistan. Everything is post 9/11 for them. And so, like, their entire childhood was the global war on terror. And so let's bring a person who has that's been his entire life, and bring that into the story. And so, yeah, I think really I was just excited about Zach having an opportunity to tell his story, tell the story of the Afghan people, about their bravery, about their sacrifice. Zach, for several years, could not work outside of his village for fear of persecution. Zach, up until shortly before he was evacuated, was still receiving night letters, death threats from the Taliban. And so the idea is what does it mean for someone who risked their lives for 4 years in support of the United States and then lived under persecution for the next decade because of their service? He couldn't leave his village for fear of death. He had to hide it in his father's house. And the idea that his visa is still denied, the fact that his children today bring up his grandmother and their uncles and their cousins, and so this is in some respects it's a major it's a success in that they're safe, but it's important to recognize that the system did not succeed, the war did not succeed, and that really the amount of tragedy that is still ongoing is worth having a conversation about.
After everything happened, General Dunford serves on our board of directors. And we asked if he would do a webinar to our members to talk about Afghanistan, because we were really getting a lot of feedback that our veteran members at the foundation were having a hard time. And I think we collectively knew that our service members in general were having a hard time with what happened in Afghanistan. And I said, listen, you don't have to talk about your thoughts on it, but I think just to bring some reassurance. And he said, I'm happy to talk, and I'm happy to talk about my thoughts and be very candid. And he got on with a few thousand individuals, and he shared that he was part of a commission under the Trump administration. When he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs for the Trump administration, his recommendation was that we, for the foreseeable future, kept a certain amount of troops in Afghanistan. When the Biden administration took over, he was part of a commission to advise the incoming administration on a direction with Afghanistan. He gave the same, he said, after a lot of thoughtful discussion and, really looking back again thoroughly on everything, he came to the same conclusion he had that he advised Trump on, and that was that we needed to keep a certain amount of troops in Afghanistan. And he said his recommendation was not taken. For me, in my lifetime, I've never seen something go so colossally wrong. And then to hear that the most senior military officer gave guidance on which direction he thought would be the best for the safety of our country, for the safety and preservation of the work that had been done in Afghanistan, and to see that it had been ignored. It was pretty amazing.
Amazing is a one word. I, as active duty, I can't comment on the, whatever strategic decisions were made. I can say that I hope lessons were learned.
Yeah.
If we don't look at this critically and say, what could have we done better? Oh, that is a real that's a real tragedy. We have to be able to capture some of the lessons learned and make sure that we don't repeat these kind of mistakes. And so that's all our collective duty. I think we should, examine it. What do we ask the 18-year-old PFC and Lance Corporal to uphold and do, and make sure that if we're asking them to do that they're fully supported in every way that they can be. And there's so much kind of horror that surrounds that evacuation at the airport, but there's one, light, and that is those Marines who held the line to the very end, and so they kept our nation's promises up until the very final moment that they could. And so that the tremendous bravery of the men and women that held the line and tried to do their absolute best to help with desperate people, I think is something that we should really recognize and celebrate, and be thankful that these young men and women still do incredible stuff like that. And then when you talk about, veterans struggling, it's really, there's this principle of moral injury, and you're told that something matters and that winning matters, and you're told that honor matters, and you're told that accountability matters. And these are values and principles that are drilled into you from officer candidate school and boot camp. And I think back to when I was singing on my first deployment. I was crossing the Helmand River, and I got sucked under, and I was drowning, quite literally drowning. And I had a decision to make. Was I going to ditch my gear so that I could live, or was I going to keep my gear on and have all my gear accounted for, but be dead? And quite literally, I thought it will be better to be dead with my gear accounted for. And because a Marine without his rifle, is, it's just, and I was blacking out, and I said my little prayer. I thought about my mom, and I thought, this is a bad way to end it. And this little thing inside me said, you gotta live, you gotta live. I pulled my cord, I ripped my gear off. I spent the next 72 hours camped out on a riverbed doing search and recovery for my rifle and my flak jacket. We recovered it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have my current job. I think my career probably would have ended much earlier. And so, but I just think that I thought losing that one rifle was maybe worse than losing my life. And because the amount of accountability and responsibility that I've been told is important, and I bought into that, and I believe it, and I believe that we fight to win, and then all that gets shattered in a moment like that, and you're angry. You said, well, I was told that this mattered, and so I was, like many veterans, I think, angry, disillusioned, and really hurt. And so, yeah, I think, you're a great leader in that you run the foundation, and you recognize that that was absolutely the right call to do that, because many of us were searching for answers and feeling lost. And every time I can't, I still have not gone back and looked at all my Signal and WhatsApp messages. It's still too raw for me to even kind of go back there. And Zach and I did our first interview together a week ago, and as we retold this, and I could hear it in his voice, and it is still emotionally draining evolution. And I wasn't, and the last time I was there was March 2013, and it still feels so connected to all of that. And so, yeah, it's a tough situation all around. And maybe I think the general, he obviously has a pretty fair assessment if I had to guess.
Yeah. What do you think that the average American is thinking as we enter 1 year? Do you think it's just lost, as 1 year out from that tragic time? I mean, do you think it's even in the collective forefront of anybody's mind other than the people that were directly involved with it?
We'll find out. Is one, we'll see how it's covered in the media. I wonder, was there a commission into the evacuation? What were those results? Who what lessons were learned? Was anybody accountable? Were there any consequences for that kind of thing, or was it a success? So I think hopefully the nation is interested in finding out what happened, how did that happen. That would be interesting to get those details. I can't speak to the pulse of the average American citizen and gauge their interest into foreign affairs. It's for the last 5 years on 9/11, I've gone to New York City, so like I'm a person who's very invested in all of that. But I don't know what I always come back to this idea of and I don't, and many people view this as like an indictment, and I'm not one of them, that America's not at war, the Marines are at war, America's at the mall. And in a sense, to me, that is a celebratory statement, although it's used as an indictment. And so I don't want America to be at the war. Like, I am serving so that my sisters and that my mom could go to the mall. It's so long as like they're at the mall and they're not at the front line, or they didn't have to go start to work at the rubber factory to, help get Humvee tires. Like, I think that's good, and so I don't know what America will prioritize or won't, but that's kind of my take.
Well, as we wrap this up, the other thing and you touched on it briefly, but the other thing that I thought was so poignant about your book was how you brought it back to the men that you served with that gave their lives in service or after service as a result of their injuries. And you shared their stories, and, in the very beginning, the story you shared of a funeral that you were at, from a triple amputee that had died of an opioid overdose. And I want to thank you, in these challenging times that we are going through in this country. The idea that you continue to share and recall stories of the fallen, and you didn't have to do that in this book. You could have very easily just shared your story and shared Zach's perspective, and it would have been a compelling book. But the way that you brought the stories of these fallen individuals, including Robert Kelly, who, was talked about in several different times during the book. I want to thank you for that. And thank you for bringing our fallen service members into the forefront and into the minds of everybody who reads this story.
Yeah, I just went to the 5th Marines Memorial Garden last week, and there's a JFK quote there. It says, "A nation reveals itself not only by the men it produces, but also by the men it honors and the men it remembers." And so it is part of my duty and responsibility to remember men like Robert Kelly and Sergeant Ian Tawney and Sergeant Metabate and Will Donnelly and Kevin DeWin and Arna Benagwa. These are names that are worth knowing. Their stories are worth remembering, just like Travis's. And so it is a duty, obligation, responsibility that I'll carry with me for the remainder of my life.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us again. Everybody, we will post a link to where you can buy Always Faithful. Like I said, it's a great book, and I think you'll all enjoy it. And it's kind of wild. A year ago I was on with you and you were like, we're doing everything we can. And I remember at one point you said, it doesn't look good, but we're trying everything we can. And the bright spot of this interview today is that Zach is here in America with his beautiful family. They're doing well. And he's got a great book that's just been released by HarperCollins. So fantastic stuff. As always, thank you for being on The Resilient Life. I always appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for your support.
Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends.